Hello everyone, let's start the renal portion of the AMEDEX 2022 for the AMC examination. To start with the MCQ, a 32-year-old woman presents to your practice with a complaint of upper respiratory tract infection evident by the fever 38.3, rhinorrhea and dry cough. Up till now, it's very important whenever you read the MCQ, just focus on the age and the gender of that particular MCQ because many times these are the clue to solving a problem. Next is the chief complaint. What is this all about? It's basically a upper respiratory tract infection in the form of fever, upper rhinorrhea, and dry cough. Next comes the examination. You find blood pressure 170 by 110 and on the two separate occasions 15 minutes apart. This blood pressure is confirmed on 2 minutes of two separate occasions, so there is a significant hypertension. On auscultation examination, abdominal bruise heard and the bruise radiates to the right flank. A Doppler duplex sonography shows right renal artery stenosis. So here the diagnosis is clear cut. He is having the renal artery stenosis, which is confirmed by the Doppler duplex ultrasonography. This is the confirmatory test for the renal artery stenosis, due to which the patient is having hypertension, due to which the patient is having abdominal bruit. So our main concern here is the renal artery stenosis, and the age of patient is 32 years. Which of the following is the most appropriate next step in the management? Whenever the question is about the next step or the initial step, you do not jump to the definitive diagnostic modalities or the big options of that particular MCQ. Like in this case, it is conventional renal arteriography or magnetic resonance angiography, or you can say percutaneous renal artery angioplasty. This is not the absolutely next step. These can be a definitive step or the most appropriate, most important, or the most particular for that disease. But when he is talking about the next step in the management, just think that that particular patient in your OPD setting or the emergency setting, and then think what will you do with that particular patient. If a patient comes to you with this much hypertension, like 170 by 110, first you will, what will you do? You will give him the medications to control the hypertension in your emergency setting. Likewise, in this MCQ, you are starting him on the either ACE inhibitors or the patient on the diuretics. We all know that the diuretics are not very a very first line or initial medicines to be prescribed in the hypertensive patients, so we are left with the ACE inhibitor. So even if we don't know about the MCQ topic as much, we can you can say choose our option or choose our answer on the exclusion basis. So renal artery stenosis is treated with enalapril or ACE inhibitor. This is the right answer here. uh, the patient of renal artery stenosis, this was just an incidental finding when we were doing the cause of the hypertension was established. Renal artery stenosis can result in the renovascular disease, in the end stage renal disease, or the chronic renal insufficiency. These are the three sequelae of the renal artery stenosis. When the age was very important in this patient, as I described earlier, because the age gives you indirect clue about the cause of the renal artery stenosis. In the younger patient, it is due to fibromuscular disease, while in older patient, it is mostly due to atherosclerosis. Because there atherosclerosis, there is a narrowing of the renal artery lumen, and this narrowing causes decreased blood flow, and eventually it causes decreased renal function and the structure. So it is an important to consider the age of the patient, gender of the patient. These are the very little clue or initial problems that we find whenever we are solving the MCQ. Renal artery stenosis presents with one or more symptoms. It can present with the abdominal bruit, as in this scenario was mentioned. It can present with the azotemia. It can present with the worsening of the hypertension or renal failure, acute kidney injury, decreased renal function. This is a very important point to consider whenever a patient of acute whenever a patient of renal artery stenosis is put on the ACE inhibitor, which is definitely the first line management of this disease, there is worsening of the RFTs. Worsening of RFTs in the form of decreased renal function or increase in the creatinine. This is very important. This is a normal phenomena. What you should be particular about, how much increase is acceptable and at what level you have to discontinue the ACE inhibitor or ARBs. The answer for this is if your patient is having greater than 25% of increase in the creatinine, or the patient is having increased potassium, which is life threatening, then you have to stop the ACE inhibitors or ARBs and jump to the second line medication, which is calcium channel blocker. So up till now we have discussed that the renal artery stenosis can result in renovascular disease, it can result in end-stage renal disease, it can result in renal insufficiency. In younger patient, it is due to fibromuscular dysplasia. In older patient, it is due to atherosclerosis. Symptom can be diverse in the form of abdominal bryozotemia, worsening hypertension, AKI, or even in the patient can have congestive cardiac failure symptoms, which is hypertension, renal insufficiency. In the absence of the decrease in the ejection fraction, that is called flash pulmonary edema. Due to renal artery stenosis, patient develop flash pulmonary edema. So whenever you encounter a patient of the renal artery stenosis, in the initial management, in the initial step, you have to do the lab or imaging studies, which is the basic investigation: renal function test, creatinine, urea, electrolyte, 24-hour urinary examination, and urine analysis. Then you go for the serological test. Serological test in the form of like rule out SLE, rule out vasculitis. These are the initial tests. Then if you go for the definitive test to consider for the particular disease, then initial imaging is Doppler duplex scanning, like in this case. Baseline investigations were these things like RFTs, LFTs, or urine analysis, or creatinine level, 24-hour urinary proteins. And the initial imaging for the particular renal artery stenosis is the Doppler duplex scan. And management is ACE inhibitors and ARBs, but there is increase in the creatinine level due to ACE inhibitor, and 25% is acceptable. Greater than 25%, you have to stop the ACE and go for the calcium channel blocker. And other important step in the management is, first is the control of blood pressure, and second is the control of your cholesterol level. Cholesterol level is in the form of statin, so it is recommended for the patients of renal artery stenosis, so of particularly in the case of atherosclerosis that were in older patient, start the statins as well as ACE inhibitors. The option E, that was revascularization treatment, it is only considered when the patient failed the medical therapy or resistant or poorly controlled hypertension. So this is important next step. If he is already taking the ACE inhibitor and you are asked about the next step in the management, then definitely it is the renal vascular treatment, renovascularization treatment. Other modalities that were mentioned in the other options, like conventional renal arteriography or the CT angiography or MR angiography or radionucleotide scans, they can be considered for the further assessment or treatment, and these are not initial medications or not as important as the antihypertensive medication. So this was all about the renal artery stenosis. You can read it on the Medscape as well, but the concepts are very much clear from this MCQ. It was a good MCQ. Next comes 26-year-old man is referred to the routine medical check by the insurance company. He has no medical problem and the physical examination is unremarkable. So we have a healthy young patient who is a male and he comes just for the routine examination and routine assessment. You find a urine dipstick which is 1 positive proteinuria. Other parameters are absolutely normal. Which of the following is the most appropriate next step in the management? So again, this is a very common scenario or the common practice you found encountered in your daily practice, that the patient comes to you with a lab report of proteinuria and you don't know what to do next. So first of all, you have to establish this proteinuria is significant or not. Second, you have to establish that whether it is transient proteinuria or it is persistent proteinuria or it's just an incidental finding. So there are different causes for these three things. You should be clear cut about it. Very first thing is that proteinuria normal value in protein urine of protein is 150 milligram per day. So it's absolutely normal to have 150 milligram per day protein in someone's urine, of which the 20 milligram is albumin. This is the normal value. Whenever there is exceeding the normal value in persistently protein excretion, this is a marker for the kidney injury. So this is the important points. Next comes whether it is incidental, whether it is transient, whether it is persistent. So you have to establish it. First of all, incidental finding or the false positive results can be due to your blood in the urine, your RBCs in the urine, semen, mucus, or alkaline urine greater than 7 pH. These are all the causes of the false positive proteinuria. You have to rule out all these things. First step is to rule out the false things. Second step is to confirm whether it is transient or it is persistent. For transient proteinuria can be due to recent strenuous exercise. It can be due to long standing period. This is called orthostatic proteinuria. Orthostatic proteinuria is typically absent in the morning and occurs afternoon, is seen in the young patient. This is very important. For this, you have for any patient who is having just one reading of proteinuria, he is very young patient, you have to establish the orthostatic proteinuria. Like in this MCQ, if we consider this MCQ, this he was a young patient, 26 years of age, he is having just one finding of the proteinuria, that was 1 plus, not very significant. So next step is to establish whether it is orthostatic proteinuria or it is persistent proteinuria, for which we are going to perform the early morning dipstick test, like this MCQ, like this is the statement, right statement, because early morning proteinuria is absent in the case of orthostatic hypertension. It's typically absent in the orthostatic hypertension. Other causes of transient hypertension we have already discussed is recent strenuous exercise, standing for the long time, pregnancy, UTI, and the acute febrile illness, and congestive heart failure, which is also transient, but it is a serious cause of proteinuria, transient proteinuria. So these are important causes of transient causes. Persistent proteinuria can be confirmed by 2 or more consecutive positive dipsticks over a 2 or more period. So first of all, a patient comes to you with a proteinuria, you will repeat the morning sample. Morning sample will confirm whether it is transient or it is persistent. We have established it's not transient, it's persistent. Then to confirm the persistent, you will repeat your urine sample after about 1 or 2 week gap. This is going to confirm whether it is a persistent proteinuria or not. So we have established the cause of persistent proteinuria. Then you will go for the further investigation like urine microscopy culture and sensitivity, renal function test in the form of urea, creatinine, electrolytes, and ACR ratio, and definitely 24-hour urinary protein is going to be the gold standard here. So this was all about the proteinuria of this patient. Like 150 milligram was normal and 20 milligram albumin was normal. Next MCQ is 75-year-old man comes to your practice with a worsening of back pain for the last month. So he is an old age patient, male patient. He's having the worsening back pain. He already having back pain that is worsening for this for some time. He denies any trauma to the back, weight loss, lower extremity pains and needle sensations, or the bladder or bowel control. This is reflecting that the patient is not having any neurological sequelae. He is not having any back pain due to neurological problem or the tabes dorsalis or any other thing. He was concerned about the prostate cancer last year and requested a prostate cancer screening with a prostate specific antigen, as a result of which was normal. So already he has undergone the PSA test, which was normal. This is slightly tenderness over the lower back, but the neurological examination is normal. He himself make it very clear that the neurological examination is normal. Plain radiograph of the lower back shows sclerotic changes in the lower lumbar region and the pelvis. Which of the following is the most appropriate next step in the management? He's not asking about the definitive step. He's not asking about the most confirmatory test. He's just asking about the next step in the management. For any patient who is having a sclerotic changes, two things that should be clear up till now, that the lytic changes of bone and there are sclerotic changes of bone. Whenever in MCQ lytic changes of bone are mentioned, it is very much about most of the time it's about multiple myeloma, lytic changes in multiple myeloma, and you will go for the Banks-Jones proteins or the electrophoresis. But in this scenario it is about sclerotic changes, and sclerotic changes most of the time, not all the time but most of the time, it is due to mets. So mets are due to some cancers, and age of the patient is also very much pointing towards the cancer or this thing, but and the patient has prostate cancer concern as well. So one reading of PSA is not very reliable. We will go for the repeat PSA in this patient. So serum PSA is going to be repeated in this patient. um, this is the right answer here. Sclerotic changes of vertebra and pelvis in elderly male suggest the prostate cancer, and the bone metastasis is a high probability. Metastatic bone cancer in prostate cancer are typically sclerotics. We have already discussed that. First of all, if the option is about the digital rectal examination, this is the most suitable option, the most important step to take. Then the repeating PSA. So DRE was not an option, so we straightforward go for the PSA. But DRE, if DRE was there, that was going to be the most appropriate answer. Okay, in 20 to 25% of the patients, you will have less than 4 nanogram per ml of PSA. That is normal value. But and most patient you will can have less than 1 nanogram per ml, despite patient is having prostate cancer. So PSA is not very reliable, but yes, this is an important as we are going to for the PSA as well. For patient with abnormalities detected on digital rectal examination or the serum PSA greater than expected for their age, transrectal ultrasonography, which is a TRUS examination or the prostate biopsy, is performed. So first of all, the patient of prostate cancer, you will go for the digital rectal examination. The second line, you are going for the PSA examination. If the PSA is negative and you are clinically very much sure about the prostate cancer, you are going to repeat the PSA. If the PSA is positive, you are going for the further test, which is TRUS. TRUS is basically your transrectal ultrasonography, and you are going for the prostate biopsy. So this is the investigation letter for this patient. Then comes the radioisotope bone scan. Yes, this is very sensitive method for detecting the bone mets, but they are distributed in the axial skeleton rather than appendicular, and the probability of test is low if the PSA is less than 4. In this patient, it was normal, so no probability of radioisoscope, no debate about this option. If the PSA is greater than 10 nanogram per ml, if there is a high grade of TRUS biopsy, which is Gleason score greater than 7, lymph node sampling is usually performed at the time of the patient undergoes surgery. So next step after TRUS is basically your lymph node sampling. This is an important step if the patient is undergoing surgery, which is called radical retropubic prostatectomy. We have already discussed it that the bone lesions lytic is multiple myeloma, sclerotic is prostate cancer, and the serum protein electrophoresis is the definitive option for the protein electrophoresis. Then there are some reasons for the increase in PSA despite not having the prostate cancer, and there are some reasons for the decrease in PSA. Increased PSA can be remembered by the mnemonic TERP. TERP is an important mnemonic or very easy mnemonic. TERP stands for T for TERP itself, which is a cause of the increase in prostate cancer. PSA, not prostate cancer. U are for urinary retention, and P for prostatitis and prostate biopsy. So these are the some conditions or some situations in which you get increased PSA despite not having the prostate cancer. And there are some causes of decreased PSA which can be remembered by mnemonic FAR. FAR is for finasteride, anti-androgen therapy, and radiotherapy. So by these two mnemonics, you can easily remember increase and decrease causes of PSA. Next comes 32-year-old man presents to the emergency department with a severe right-sided colicky abdominal pain and blood in the urine. So the patient is young patient, male patient. He's having right-sided colicky abdominal pain, very much evident that it's going to be a renal colic, and the blood in the urine. So there is maybe some obstructive symptoms due to which he's having hematuria. The provisional diagnosis of renal stones, and the patient undergoes imaging assessment, ultrasonography, and CT abdomen. It revealed 4 millimeter stone in the vesico-ureteric junction. So whenever there is a MCQ about the renal stones, two things are very important. First, the size of the stone. Second, the location of the stone. This is going to decide the particular modality, investigations, and the treatment modalities for your patient. After initial analgesia, which of the going is more appropriate management? So he is asking about the next step or the most appropriate management in this patient. So if the patient is having a small stone like 5 to 7 stone, we can observe the patient. This stone has pretty much high chance of passing spontaneous, so we can wait and watch while giving analgesia to the patient for relief of pain. So option here is going to be conservative management with the analgesia and hydration. Most renal stones, even if symptomatic, like in this case the patient was having pain, he was symptomatic, but initially he can be managed conservatively with the hydration and analgesia. The majority of stain will pass within 6 weeks. So you should counsel the patient that the 6 weeks is a huge time. The patient should be in patience, However, imaging should be performed at first visit to allow the confidence stratification between the cases in whom stones can be conservatively managed safely and those who can be referred for the further specialist management. 60% of stones like 5 to 7 millimeter have the conservative management, whereas greater than 7 millimeter there is chances of spontaneous passage declines. It decreases with the increasing age and the more proximal stones. So you should be conscious about the stones that are more proximal in location. The likelihood of greater than 10 millimeters spontaneously is very, very low. The patient should be made aware of likelihood of passage because some patient will choose immediate surgical treatment to avoid the possibility of further episodes of renal colic, because 6 weeks is a great interval for the patient to suffer from the renal colic. It's some devastating pain. All patients undergo conservative management should be advised to present to emergency department if they develop. So if you are just sending the patient home on the conservative management, you should counsel the patient about the red flag signs or the alarming symptom for which he should return to you. These are UTI and the pain unbearable despite analgesia. These are the two options. If the patient is having UTI or severe pain, he should come back to you. Renal conflict can be intensely painful. Ureteric peristalsis increases the back pressure behind the obstructing stone, dilates the renal capsule. So important thing is NSAIDs, NSAIDs, NSAIDs. This is very important in the management of the renal colic pain. NSAIDs, they do basically, they decrease the prostaglandin mediated pain and decrease the glomerular blood flow that was causing the back pressure due to urinary obstruction. And the many patients prefer NSAID suppositories because NSAIDs can cause very GI disturbances like vomiting, and the GI mucosa are disrupted. So this they prefer suppositories. Another important medication is alpha 1 antagonist, which is a selective alpha 1 blocker in the form of tamsulosin. It can be prescribed along with NSAIDs, not alone, but along with the NSAIDs, and they are contraindicated in patients with a severe renal or hepatic failure or patient with a severe orthostatic hypotension. First, managing the pain of the patient with the NSAIDs, with the tamsulosin, then you are going for the investigations. Further investigation, you can say in the form of X-ray KUB. If the stone was evident, you should repeat after 4 weeks X-ray KUB. If the stone is not visible, CT KUB is done. If the patient is having stone of greater than 7 millimeter, or the patient is unable to pass the spontaneous passage of stone 3 weeks after, renal risk increases after 6 weeks. So 6 weeks can be a safe passage of time, but we just wait for the 3 weeks most of the time, and the patient is having severe pain, and the patient is having UTI symptoms, and he's having solitary kidney, so he cannot risk his kidney. These are the symptoms for which, or the situation for which, you should refer the patient to the urologist. You should not play the patients anymore. This patient has stone of less than 7 millimeters, so it can be managed conservatively, you can say. Other options for the surgical options here in Australia can be PCNL, which is percutaneous nephrolithotomy, or laser lithotripsy, or another option is ESWL, which is end stage shockwave lithotripsy. Lithotripsy is basically breaking the stone with a laser. It's a relatively inexpensive and the safer procedure, but the disadvantage for this is that we break the stone and we pass a degestant into the ureter, which is very much problematic for the patient most of the time, and it can cause UTI as well. So stenting is a drawback for this procedure. Otherwise, this procedure is a very good access, and objective clearance of stone is very good, and widespread availability is here. For this procedure, we use flexible or rigid scope to see the stone. Another option was extracorporeal shockwave lithotripsy. This is a modified procedure most of the time. This is rarely performed in Australia. This is an invasive procedure, and mostly it is well tolerated and stent is not required, but there is a increased risk of bruising, pain, urinary obstruction, hematuria. So risk factors are there, and we tend to avoid these things. Another important disadvantage for this procedure is that there is a poor clearance of the lower pole or the larger stones. It is not good for the pregnant women. It is not widely available. PCNL, percutaneous nephrolithotomy, is basically giving the 2 centimeter incision over the kidney renal calyces and directly approaching the nephroscope into the kidney and removing the stone. So this is also an invasive procedure. This is excellent for the larger scopes or the in the calyces, but the drawback is that there can be it usually cannot access ureteric stones, or it has high morbidity rate, and not every urologist performs this procedure because this is a surgical modality. So this was all about a review of the renal stones. Next comes a 22-year-old man presents to emergency department with a cough, dyspnea of 1 week duration, as well as fever, decreased urine output, and dark color urine. So we are dealing with a young patient, and we are dealing with the two problems: upper respiratory tract infection as well as UTI, which is a urinary tract infection. So we are having respiratory, and we are having kidney problems in a young patient. This combination is clear cut for the Good's-Pasture syndrome. Make it in your mind very clear that whenever this combination is there, your first things that should click in your mind is GPS, which is Good's-Pasture syndrome. And the single most accurate investigation to establish the diagnosis for the Good's-Pasture syndrome is your renal biopsy. Although antiglomerular based membrane antibodies are very much accurate, and these are making the diagnostic criteria for the Good's-Pasture syndrome, but renal biopsy is the most appropriate investigation. In this patient, simultaneously of the lung involvement, cough, and dyspnea with renal involvement, Goodpasture syndrome, antiglomerular basement membrane syndrome is most likely disease, and the patient it can affect all ages, but the younger than 30 years are most likely, and the pulmonary involvement is in the form of hemoptysis in the form of alveolar hemorrhage. So alveolar hemorrhage is a great complication of Goodpasture syndrome. Goodpasture syndrome definition, definitive treatment is first line renal biopsy, second line is antiglomerular basement membrane antibodies. On light microscopy, you are going to have the crysenteric glomerulonephritis or the linear deposits of IgE along the glomerular basement membrane. These are two important findings, crysenteric and the linear deposits. And if the question is asked about the most appropriate next step or the very first step, then your answer would be urine analysis. This patient has presented with a clinical picture of AKI and the lung symptom. The first step is to important to define whether the AKI is pre-renal, renal, or post-renal. There are different causes for the pre-renal, renal, or post-renal causes. The pre-renal is due to hypoperfusion in the form of hypovolemia, sepsis, reduced renal volume, heart failure, decompensated liver failure. Renal is due to glomerulonephritis, interstitial nephritis, tubular necrosis, and the post-renal is due to any obstruction or prostatic hypertrophy or malignancy. So these are the important causes. You have to establish in the patient of AKI. You have to establish the cause of AKI, whether it's pre or it's renal or it's post-renal. So urine analysis is going to help in this situation. Next comes investigations. Other investigation you will go for this patient is urine. After urine analysis, you go for the microscopic culture sensitivity to see for the red cell morphology, cast, and quantification of creatinine, albumin, protein, 24-hour proteins. And this is important thing that the low less than 20 millimole per liter urinary sodium suggests pre-renal azotemia rather than renal tubular necrosis. So urinary sodium is an important finding as well. Then you will go for the renal ultrasonography, then blood test to exclude the other causes of this like SLE or vasculitis, and you will go for the complement levels, ANA levels to rule out the autoimmune diseases. In this question, the single most accurate test is to reach a diagnosis, not for the workup, for the diagnosis. So last line, as I'm always saying this is very important, that what he is asking about the initial management or the most accurate management or the most definitive management to establish a diagnosis, not to manage the patient. So it was important. This was all about the renal MCQs, and we have done so far this file. We have covered just 34 pages.